Hi, everyone, and welcome to our session today on unified platforms and really rethinking our trial planning and execution. So we're here today, myself, Heather DiFrusicia, the Associate Director of Randomization and Trial Supply Management and IWRS here at Axiom Real-Time Metrics, and I'm here with my colleague, Brian.
Hi there, everyone. I'm the Senior Director for Global Clinical Management here at Axiom Real-Time Metrics.
And we're here to talk to you today again about rethinking how you approach your trials. And this is all about when utilizing the technology that you have. And here at Axiom, we have our unified platform, our Fusion eClinical suite. Everything from EDC, data management, RTSM, of course, as well as CTMS and ePro. And you can see with all of our modules, it's available via a single logon. So you really have access to all of your data. So let's start by just talking about our approaches to trial execution. Brian?
Thanks, Heather. So I think if we're talking about our approaches to trial execution, it's a good place to start at the beginning and think about what the kind of traditional approach to trial execution looks like. So for those of you who've been in the industry for a number of years, like myself, certainly in the last 20 years, there's been a massive amount of advancement over that period in the way we execute trials. But largely trials are all centered on a kind of traditional phased approach. Now, this stems from the fact that in the 1980s and 90s, when modern trial process was being developed, we really had the technology that lent itself to this kind of approach. So if we think about CRFs back in the day being paper-based, and then of course the advent of non-carbon required paper was a huge technical advancement for monitors and CRAs and trial designers in general. And a lot of the processes that have still employed in clinical trials today come from that kind of stepwise approach to data collection, from the data entry at site through to the processing and monitoring of that data at the site, and then being collected and manually transported through to the data managers, and double data entry, for those of you who remember that, to make sure that the data was of the correct quality. And then ultimately the database would be something that would be stored available only to a few select people at the end. And that stepwise phased approach, as I say, came from the technology that was available back then. One of the things that's happened over that period of time is the advent of things like EDC, which has meant that the data can be processed and cleaned and used in a different way. But a large proportion of the industry still focus on using those tools and fitting those tools like EDC to the phased approach that was originally grew out of the technology that was available at the time. And so you have this event where the technology is being used to fit into the process that we have, rather than us thinking about how we can drive the process from the technology that's available. So if we think about how the data can flow now, rather than it being paper-based, we've already talked about electronic data capture and web-based systems, which were the next generation of EDC, of course, and what we have now, moving into artificial intelligence as we go forward into the future. But right now, we think about the data being a continuous data flow rather than those stepwise approach. So where we mentioned before, the data was collected at the site, and then the monitor traveled to the site, reviewed, source document verified, then transported the data back to another part of the process for data management, and so on and so forth. Now that data is available to everybody across the whole spectrum of the process at any point, because it's entered in real time, and it can be viewed in real time by anybody with the appropriate login. And it's this continuous approach that really offers us potential in terms of both effectiveness of the data and efficiency. And what do we mean by effectiveness and efficiency? Well, effectiveness in the sense that the data is real time, so we can process it, much quicker than we used to be able to, and that gives us an effective way of being able to review the data in holistically, but also in terms of efficiency, because we save that time in between the steps of the previous phased approach. Now we can look at the data in real time at any point along its journey. So this brings us to our core message, I guess, of today, which is how do we make sure that as trial designers and trial execution designers and planners, are we planning the technology into the process right at the outset? So we're fitting our process to the technology that's available, rather than looking at a process and then trying to fit technology that's available into something that was really created for a different era.
Absolutely. And what we're going to talk to you today are some key solutions. So 3 different pieces of technology and how each of those we can approach them differently. The 3 solutions are the risk management, monitoring, and eTMF. So we'll start with our risk management. So traditionally in that phased approach, it's really more so focused on the study startup. We're doing the work to identify the risks and set the triggers. And then there's manual trackers and data review for triggers that are met. So monitoring to see how we're currently sitting against those triggers. When we're taking that continuous approach, then of course we can't get away. We need to identify our risks, we need to set our triggers, but we can also make those triggers a little bit more complex. We can set multiple different settings, so there's some warnings in there. So we're moving away from just finding out when there's an actual impact. We want to find out before there's an impact, so then we can act, retrain, etc., before there's that greater impact on the study. And of course, with this approach, then you have greater visibility. There's also greater accountability, and that's because not only at the sponsor level do you have access to that, at the CRO level do you have access to that information. Each of the monitors have access for that information for their individual sites, so they can take more ownership of that. And when they're receiving the notifications that a flag has met or something's trending that way, their compliance is off, then when we're looking at what can we do as part of that continuous approach, and Brian will talk about this in a moment, but really they can act and support their sites and also flag to the sponsor for next steps as well. And one of these key messages about having that unified platform and using it to your greatest advantage is that you can visualize this information. You have all of your information in one place. One of those examples is IP compliance. So if you, for example, are in a scenario where the subjects are taking their medication and confirming what their dose is, maybe twice a day, and they're updating it and noting that in their ePro app. And so what you can see is you can set those risk metrics around compliance, and you can have the notifications, the supporting reports behind it, so you can dig in deeper and determine what the best next step is. Brian?
Thanks, Heather. So we already talked a little bit about monitoring, and I guess monitoring is one of the most obvious places where technology has made the biggest impact into clinical trial design. EDC has obviously been around for a long time and it's well known, but it's worth revisiting that again. Without risk of dating myself, if you like, when I was a monitor, I can still remember the advent of non-carbon required paper coming in, and what an amazing advancement we all thought that was, because there was no requirement to have double entry at site anymore. Of course, we've moved on to that, so now data is captured electronically and it's put on the cloud and is therefore available to anyone. But interestingly, what we've noticed within the industry is there is still a hang-up about how monitoring is done with cloud-based systems. So even to this point, visits are still scheduled for the majority of sites around an archaic system of when data is entered. That is to say that the visit schedule kind of drives the data entry, as opposed to what should really be happening for quality of data, which is that data entry should be driven by the patient schedule. So as patients come in, we should be seeing that data is entered immediately and that the monitor is notified of that data entry and able to go in and actually begin the monitoring process almost instantaneously if they want to, but certainly on a schedule that's driven by the patient's schedule, the patient visit schedule, and not by a monitoring visit schedule, which is put in place to suit the sponsor rather than the individual. And that can bring about a great increase in effectiveness of data. So subject enrollment and follow-up scheduling, we talked about that a little bit there. And also it means that key events like dosing, AEs, SAEs, AEs now can be notified in real time. And again, the monitor can go in and check that data, maybe even trigger a monitoring visit based on the number of AEs that are going on. And again, adds to the effectiveness of the quality of your trial. So all of these things should be considered as you approach a trial, and really question whether or not you're fitting the technology to a system that you're familiar with, or whether you're really thinking about how the technology can drive the process for better effectiveness and better efficiency in the collection and quality of your data. And again, as Heather said, and this is very, very important, the fact that all of these things are only as valuable as your insight into them. So that ability to be able to be notified of when events are occurring in real time, but also be able to look at it at regular defined intervals and be able to show what the progress of your data and those notifications is over time is significantly important. So a system that captures information in real time is really only half of the solution. The other half of the solution is being able to have visibility into that information when and as you want it. Same can be applied to the trial master file, and we see a massive emphasis being placed on trial documentation over the last 5 or 10 years in trials, and we really need to think now about how we apply this to our planning. Gone are the days where the TMF was almost an afterthought and you collected your documentation at the end and decided what documentation you had available and what you were going to present. Regulators are not looking for that. If indeed they ever were, they're certainly not looking for that now. What they want to see is a contemporaneous order of documentation throughout the study that tells a contemporary story about the study as it happened. And so it's not enough just to have the documentation, you also have to have metadata around that documentation, which shows when it was collected, who the touch points of that documentation were, and when it was filed. That's very important, and eTMF is a massive advancement in helping us to meet those requirements of regulators as we go through. And I think the next slide shows a typical TMF life cycle as it happens in reality and as we've become to expect of traditional trials. And you can see lots of documentation collected at the outset, then a lull, and then a mad rush at the end, if you like, to demonstrate that you have the quality around your trial that you are expected to display. Regulators have got used to this, and what they're actually looking for now is more of a data collection process like this, which is, again, you'll see a larger number of documents collected at the beginning of the trial. That's quite normal for study startup and site setup, etc. But then they expect to see a contemporary collection of data that tells the story of what was happening in that trial all the way through, leading to a slight increase at the end, but certainly not the bolus of documentation that we used to see in previous trials. If you don't have a system that can produce data metrics around TMF that show something like this, then you are going to be questioned by that at a regulator. And we see now that the most common audit finding in inspections for application, the new drug application and IDEs, is around documentation collection and the ability to be able to show that your eTMF is contemporary. Again, eTMF is only as important as the data that it can provide you, and in turn you can provide to inspectors when they come calling. So it's very important that your eTMF is not just an electronic filing cabinet, but is also provides metrics on the health of your TMF and can be able to show the life cycle of any documentation within it at any point.
So what are those kind of key themes that we kept coming back to when we talked through each of those three technologies? And that's really the notifications, having those in real time, whether it's upcoming patient visits, so then there can be that awareness and that expectation that data entry is coming in, that the subject was actually screened or was actually enrolled, came in for their visit, was discontinued, and you need to close that subject out. SAE notifications, deviations, data, it goes on and on. Basically, what you're looking for is that any data point should be able to trigger that notification, and you should be able to have the flexibility with your technology that you can make it notify you in your preferred format. Is it an email? Is it a text? Is it a phone call? And who are those key parties that the notifications need to go out to? Another one, which we touched on a bit already, was just being able to visualize. So being able to log in and have those kind of key metrics flagged to you. What are your key targets? What is the status of enrollment? How close are we to having enough events to get ready for our next DSMB? All of those details are readily available. And the last piece is being able to really dig down deeper and view the details. So being able to just with a couple of clicks access all of your data through reporting, and being able to, again, have the flexibility to configure, to customize to your needs for your protocol based on your risk mitigation plans, then that reporting is essential. So just kind of summarizing what we've talked about, it's that unified platform that's giving us the central data. It's allowing us for global awareness, visibility, and we really need to make sure that those notifications, dashboards, and reports are in real time and they're configured in a way that it's going to highlight what those key data points are and what those actions are that are required. And it's really going back to what Brian's noted, what I've noted, is we really need to make sure we're considering the technology in the execution and really building those into your study plan. So kind of taking those back, looking at where that fits into your monitoring plan, into your TMF plan, and building in those pieces into the process from the beginning. So we're really not just automating a manual task, but we're really, really trying to rethink that overall approach. So of course, Fusion can do all of this. It really can act as your connected hub for your study data. Of course, as we talked about earlier, it's with that single logon, you have access to all of your modules and all of your data. You can kind of pick and choose what's applicable for you, and the same thing goes for the services that support, whether it's biostats or additional clinical management and monitoring, then we're here to support you there. We really want to focus on the aspect of data-driven studies. And again, that goes back to our technology facilitating and allowing us to do so. And a big part is not just being able to collect the data, but actually access it and act on it. And reports, dashboards, and having the data at your fingertips is key. And behind that, not just the technology, but also the team. Here at Axiom, we are committed to your study success, and we're here to support you as you rethink your trial execution. Thank you, everyone, for listening today, and looking forward to talking to you.
Thank you.
Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we get started, just want to remind everyone to answer our 2 poll questions by using the bar at the bottom of your screen. Click on the polls icon and a panel will open up on the right-hand side for you, and you can vote. And our 2 poll questions for today are: what percentage of your studies use a unified platform? And do you conduct a review of previous study conduct execution before planning your next study? So please take a moment to vote, and we'll walk through those results together. We'll just take a note of where we're at now. So it looks like our highest percentage is the 25 to 49%. So it looks like quite a bit of the studies that are happening right now with all of you today are using a unified platform. And then it looks like all of you, at least those of you that have voted, are conducting that review of your previous study conduct execution before you switch over to your next study. So that is great. So on that note, Brian, do you want to speak a little bit to maybe that second one?
Yeah, very much. Actually, we predicted, you and I, Heather, that the answer to this question would be predominantly yes. And we've certainly seen a lot of people who do kind of post-mortem dives, they're often called in the industry, into previous studies. What's interesting is that the level of follow-up after that meeting takes place. So after you've done a thorough review of a previous study to find out, lessons learned and what could have done better, is how often those lessons are actually rewritten into SOPs and other guiding documents and principles going forward. So the review is really, really important, I think, for inherent knowledge, but it's also important to make sure that those lessons are fed into future studies. Quite often we see a cycle of repeated mistakes around studies, simply people then become even more frustrated because they've learned the lessons but they're not applied. So that follow-up is critically important.
Absolutely. Okay, so our next question here, just in the chat box, can the principles of using technology to design better study execution be applied after study start? So I can take this one. And one thing that we really like to highlight is that mid-study, you can take that pause, make that wish list, meet and take that time to really think about what maybe there's another module or a feature that can better support your study. So really reach out to your vendors, to your partners, as they might surprise you with some of the options that are available. And it's something that I want to make sure that it's not seen as a bad thing, as a negative thing, because this is allowing you to really do that review of your study metrics and make those course corrections and take those lessons learned and apply them in real time. And it is something that does come up quite often, where we'll revisit some recommendations that maybe we had noted earlier on in the study startup, but maybe that wasn't a priority for the study at that point. But revisiting those recommendations and looking at what options can make the most benefit now, and can get up and running quickly. And then maybe something might not be practical for now, but you can have that in your back pocket and flag that for your future studies. So it's really having that constant review, looking at what can we do better, and doing that course correction before there's an impact. And of course, this also applies when we're talking about mid-study rescues, whether we're taking on and activating the inventory management module, or taking on a study where they didn't they had an IRT, but maybe it didn't have all of it didn't meet all of their needs, or can't support their protocol amendment requirements. So that is something that does happen quite often. Okay, so our next question is on the TMF. So one of the ones that we did talk about, of course, was the eTMF, one of our highlights. And this question is, how do you support ongoing TMF maintenance? Brian, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, that's a terrific question. So I think the important part of that is ongoing TMF maintenance. So whoever's asked that question has really hit on it there. We don't want to be waiting to the end and then trying to correct any errors we see in the TMF or any discrepancies between the TMF. We want to be having a plan right at the start to think about how we ensure that TMF maintenance is an ongoing policy throughout the study. So planning is critically important there. And I think certainly from my experience, one of the things that you have to have with that plan is buy-in at the highest level of your organization. So you really have to change people's mindsets about TMF and documentation and make them realize that as contributors, they're responsible for the documentation in a contemporary fashion. And that really is aided by having the highest level of your organization supporting that message. So have them understand the importance of what you're doing with regard to contemporaneous TMF policies, and then really have them assist you in supporting the driving of that message through. So planning and accountability are critically important when it comes to TMF. And of course, also the technology is critically important as well. Making sure that you have the metrics that you can pull in real time and be able to say, these are the documents that should be in there and are not in there, or these are the documents that require attention in order for us to be able to lock them off for the remainder of the study. So accountability, buy-in at the highest level, and really that ongoing metric review is critically important.
Absolutely. Okay, our next question here. So like this morning, technology failed. How do you minimize the risk of losing data when technology is used by patients and that fails? So I'd kind of approach this on two sides. So one, when we're talking about technology as a whole on the wider scale, then of course it's critical that your partners, that your vendors have those dedicated backups and the redundancy is key. So then if one part fails, then you still have your additional servers to rely on. But when we're talking about the patient side, then of course there's a couple different things there as well. So when we're talking about the patient data, we're of course talking more so on ePro devices. They're entering their questionnaires in, maybe they don't have internet connection. So it doesn't necessarily need to have that real-time syncing. It can hold that data temporarily until it's available, until the technology is back up and running or the internet connection is back up and running. But it's also important to have those supporting services, so the right team members in place so that they can reach out and ask for help and troubleshoot, and have those services like our customer care service, which is available 24/7, available to support those patients and comfortable with that particular study needs. Another thing, of course, is paper. And maybe, Brian, you can talk a little bit about that.
I was just thinking the same thing. So as much as we want to get away from the paper-based system, I think, it's always a reliable backup. And AEs are the thing that occur to me here. We want to make sure that even if we can't transmit the information in real time because of a system breakdown like it's happened this morning, we can still ensure that we capture the information in real time. And then once that's captured, it can be input just like it was back in the day with double data entry and all those other things. So there's always a backup, but you have to plan for that backup.
Absolutely. And one more question that hopefully we can fit in. How is the need for SDV coordinated with a continuous remote monitoring approach? Brian?
Yeah, I think really quickly, SDV is critically important, but I think it's focus here. The answer to this question is really about focus. So we want to make sure that the visits are scheduled in such a way that we can focus on the things that's important while we're on site and do as many of the other things off site with the technology as possible. So SDV can be really focused on at site rather than all of those other things that you could have done before the visit, your CRA even arrived.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, that brings us to the end. Thank you, everyone, for your time today. I hope that you learned some pieces and will kind of take that different approach and kind of rethink how you approach your studies moving forward. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.